The sun had barely risen over the plains when Caleb Turner first noticed something unusual about the new cook. Morning light filtered through the thin kitchen window, casting pale gold streaks across the rough wooden floor. The ranch house was quiet except for the steady rhythm of a knife striking the cutting board. Li Wei moved with deliberate precision, shoulders relaxed, expression unreadable. Steam curled from a pot on the stove, carrying the scent of ginger and beef through the air, an unfamiliar but welcome change from the usual salt pork and beans. Caleb leaned against the doorway, arms folded, watching without announcing himself. He had hired many men over the years, drifters, former soldiers, farm boys looking for wages, but none moved like this. There was no wasted motion in Li Wei's work. Every gesture was careful, almost disciplined, as though cooking were something sacred rather than a chore. When Li Wei reached for a sack of flour stored on a high shelf, he stretched upward, sleeves sliding back along his forearm. That was when Caleb saw them. The scars were thin and pale, running in uneven lines along the inside of the cook's arm. Some crossed over others, forming a faint lattice of old wounds. They weren't kitchen burns. Caleb had seen enough of those to recognize the difference. These were sharper, deliberate, marks left by something intentional. Li Wei lowered the flour carefully, unaware he had been observed. He tugged his sleeve back down with a subtle motion, as if it were habit. Caleb straightened but said nothing. At breakfast, the ranch hands filled the long table, boots thudding against chair legs, laughter loud and careless. They complimented the food through full mouths, praising the tenderness of the meat and the flavor of the broth. Yet none of them addressed Li Wei directly. They spoke about him as if he were invisible. "Cook did good today," one of them muttered. Li Wei bowed his head slightly in acknowledgement but didn't respond. He poured tea for Caleb first before setting down his own cup last. Caleb noticed that, too. Later that afternoon, he rode into town for supplies. Li Wei accompanied him, sitting quietly in the wagon, hands folded in his lap. The main street of Red Hollow buzzed with idle gossip and sidelong glances. Conversations dipped as they passed. Caleb kept his eyes forward, jaw set. Inside the general store, the clerk barely concealed his disdain. He avoided handing items directly to Li Wei, placing them on the counter instead. When they stepped back outside, a group of boys lingered near the hitching posts. One snickered, another whispered something Caleb didn't fully catch, but he saw the stone leave the boy's hand. It struck the wagon wheel with a dull clack. Li Wei didn't react, not a flinch, not a word. On the ride back, the silence stretched long between them. The prairie wind tugged at their coats, carrying the distant scent of rain. "You've worked hard jobs before," Caleb said finally, voice even. "Yes," Li Wei replied simply. Caleb glanced at him. The cook's gaze remained fixed on the horizon, calm as ever. But for a fleeting second, as the sunlight caught his profile, Caleb saw something deeper than patience in his expression. Endurance. And that was when Caleb knew the scars on Li Wei's arm were not accidents of a kitchen, but reminders of battles fought in places far harsher than this ranch. He tightened his grip on the reins, a quiet resolve beginning to take shape in his chest. Red Hollow might pretend not to see what was happening. But he had seen enough. The storm rolled in fast that evening, dark clouds swallowing the last streaks of orange light over the prairie. Wind rattled the shutters of the ranch house, and thunder grumbled low across the open land. Inside, the kitchen glowed with lamplight, shadows swaying against the walls as the flame flickered. Caleb had come in early from the fields, rain already soaking through his coat. He paused in the hallway when he heard a sharp intake of breath from the kitchen, quick, restrained, as if someone had swallowed pain before it could fully escape. He stepped inside without announcing himself. Li Wei stood near the washbasin, back partially turned. His shirt hung loose around his shoulders, fabric darkened where rain had seeped through. A small tin of salve sat open beside him. He held a cloth against his upper arm, but when he moved it aside to examine the wound, Caleb's stomach tightened. The bruise was fresh, blooming deep purple beneath the skin. A cut split the surface just below the shoulder, still raw. And across his back, visible where the shirt had fallen away, were older scars Caleb had only glimpsed before. Long, raised welts crossed in uneven lines, some thicker than others. They told a story no man should have to carry. Li Wei sensed him then. He reached for his shirt instinctively. "You don't have to cover it," Caleb said quietly. For a moment, only the storm answered, rain striking the roof in steady sheets. "It was nothing," Li Wei replied. His tone was calm, controlled. "A misunderstanding in town. Caleb stepped closer, boots heavy against the wooden floor. That's no misunderstanding. Li Wei's eyes lowered, not in shame but in calculation, as if weighing how much truth could safely be offered. Some men do not approve of my presence. They believe I take work that should belong to them. You cook, Caleb said, voice tightening. You keep this place running. That work belongs to you because you earn it. Silence again. Thunder cracked sharply overhead. Li Wei dipped the cloth into the basin and resumed cleaning the cut, movements steady despite the sting. Where I come from, he said after a pause, it is unwise to challenge men who already hate you. Caleb studied him, noticing how carefully he kept his breathing even. This wasn't the first time he had endured something like this. It was routine. Who? Caleb asked. Li Wei hesitated. The hesitation was brief, but it was there. Caleb's jaw flexed. Was it the same boys who threw the stone last week? Or their fathers? The cook's hand stilled for half a second before continuing. That was answer enough. Caleb turned toward the window, staring out into the rain-lashed darkness. Red Hollow liked to think of itself as decent, hardworking. But decency had limits when it came to men like Li Wei. You should not involve yourself, Li Wei said quietly. It will bring you trouble. Caleb let out a low breath. Trouble already walked through my kitchen door tonight. Lightning flashed, illuminating the room in stark white for a heartbeat. In that flash, Caleb saw not just scars, but dignity, unbroken, unbent. He stepped forward and took the cloth gently from Li Wei's hand. Sit, he ordered, not harshly, but firmly. Li Wei looked surprised, then slowly obeyed. Caleb cleaned the wound himself, movements careful despite his rough hands. The gesture was simple, but it carried weight neither man voiced aloud. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, something else was forming, something steadier than anger. When Caleb finished, he tossed the bloodied cloth aside. His expression had changed. It was no longer quiet concern. It was decision. By the time the storm cleared, Caleb had already made up his mind. The next morning dawned sharp and clear, the sky scrubbed clean by the night's rain. Red Hollow looked almost peaceful under the early light, as if it had never harbored cruelty at all. Caleb rode in without hesitation, Li Wei seated beside him in the wagon despite his protests. You don't need to come, Li Wei had said quietly before they left. Yes, Caleb replied, voice calm but immovable. You do. They stopped directly in front of the saloon, the most public place in town. Men lingered outside with coffee cups and idle conversation. Their laughter faded when they saw who had arrived, and who sat beside him. Caleb climbed down first, then deliberately turned and offered his hand to Li Wei. Not as an employer helping a servant. As an equal. Li Wei paused only briefly before accepting it. His posture remained straight, though Caleb could feel the tension in his grip. The saloon doors swung open as they entered. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Cards froze in midair. The piano player let his fingers fall silent against the keys. Caleb removed his hat slowly, eyes sweeping the room. Morning, he said evenly. No one answered. He walked to the largest table near the front window, the one usually reserved for cattle contracts and town matters. He pulled out a chair and gestured for Li Wei to sit. A murmur rippled across the room. You've got nerve bringing him in here, one man muttered from the bar. Caleb turned his head slightly. I've got nerve bringing my partner in for a drink. The word landed heavy. Partner. Someone scoffed. Caleb reached into his coat and withdrew a folded document. He placed it flat on the table for all to see. Starting this week, Li Wei oversees supply purchases and distribution for my ranch and 3 others. That makes him responsible for more business in this town than most of you put together. A few men shifted uncomfortably. And if there's an issue with that, Caleb continued, voice steady but iron beneath it, you can bring it to me. Not to him. The message was unmistakable. A chair scraped loudly against the floor as one of the larger ranch hands stood. You threatening us, Turner? Caleb met his stare without blinking. I'm clarifying. Silence stretched long and tight. Li Wei sat quietly, hands folded on the table, gaze forward. He did not shrink. He did not challenge. His composure spoke louder than any defense. Finally, the saloon keeper cleared his throat. What'll it be? Caleb glanced at Li Wei. Tea. A few snickers rose, quickly stifled when Caleb's eyes shifted their direction. 2 cups were brought out. Caleb lifted his first, waiting. Li Wei mirrored the motion. They drank together. It was a small act. Simple. But in Red Hollow, it was revolutionary. By sitting side by side in plain view, Caleb had redrawn a line that prejudice had long blurred. He had placed his reputation, his business, and if necessary his safety, squarely between Li Wei and the town's hatred. No one spoke again while they finished. And when they stepped back out into the sunlight, the street seemed quieter, not because hearts had changed overnight, but because something had shifted. The lone rancher had chosen his side. And Red Hollow understood that any man who dared cross Li Wei would no longer face a silent target. He would face Caleb Turner.